Hello, it's Davey Mooney coming to you from the University of North Texas, where I run the jazz guitar program. Benedetto artist, Sunnyside Records artist. The latest is The Word. I'm getting ready to go to Japan next month, which is September 2025. Do a little tour with Ko, Omura, and the boys. Got a couple Mel Bay books, Personalizing Jazz Vocabulary and Into the Labyrinth. And the new book is out, y'all. It's called How to Achieve Great Jazz Phrasing, A Practical Method. I don't have my copy yet, but my advanced copies. But the book is out there. You can find it on the internet, the Mel Bay website, also Amazon, places like that. And I'll be doing some videos, going through the book as soon as I get the copy in my hot little hands. And let's see, what else is going on? We're about to start the semester here. It's Tuesday right now, and on Friday, it's in August. Where are we? August 12th. There we go. Friday we're going to do our auditions and get everybody placed in their lab bands and all that. Next week, right to it. But that's not what I want to talk to you about today. I actually want to talk about something, a theoretical concept that came to me recently, or it sort of jogged my memory of when I was first studying jazz guitar with Hank Mackie in New Orleans. And it's this term jazz minor. And I don't know if any of you all have ever heard that term. But I started thinking about it again because I believe it was Sheryl Bailey, a great guitar player, shout out to Sheryl Bailey, posted something on Facebook that was a one-page sheet of paper, obviously a PDF of the sheet of paper, that was from a lesson that she had with Emily Remler, I guess probably in the late 70s or earlier 80s. And it was really interesting to me because it was very similar to the stuff that Hank Mackie taught me back in the mid-90s in New Orleans. And the ideas of this idea of jazz minor, which is really just another name for the ascending melodic minor scale. And I think in my generation, this information sort of came to us via melodic minor modes. And so like super Locrian, Lydian dominant, Lydian augmented, and things like that. But I remember when Hank was first teaching me, he he termed the scale the jazz minor scale, because in classical music, your melodic minor scale, it's one thing ascending and then another thing descending, because they get really upset about intervals and things like that. I don't quite understand what the big deal is. But anyway, so for instance, if you're talking about D jazz minor, D melodic minor, in classical music, on the way down, you have to flat the six. I think it's to make the movement to the fifth degree more weighted, but I don't know. In jazz, we don't care about that much. But what this sheet of paper says, and what I'm looking at right now, I went ahead and did a little screenshot of it, is an interesting way of, or I think like a very concise, effective, practical way to apply the melodic minor kind of harmony to your playing. This that I think I really benefited from, and it's kind of theoretical, but also not that theoretical. And I realize, I'm gonna talk about it in a second, but I realize that this type of sort of jazz education way of thinking about the music and improvisation is not necessarily the most organic or natural or vocabulary-based, listening-based way to learn to play the music. But for me, coming up in the 90s, it really helped me a lot. I didn't have that many resources to figure out how to play the music. And I tried to learn things from records, but when I was first starting out, I could learn the actual pitches, I did that off a Wes Montgomery record, but trying to understand what was going on and have any hope of applying it in another playing context was like not really going to happen for me. So basically what this sheet of paper says is, and I'm kind of reading from it, so you have applying this jazz minor scale to two different types of dominants. And the idea is you have the type of dominant, let's say G7, a G7 that resolves to C major or C minor. So a dominant 7 that's going to resolve up a fourth, right, or down a fifth. Versus a dominant 7 that doesn't do that. Really classifying dominants, especially as they occur in, in tunes and harmony, as really, one or the other. And I found later on that this works most of the time, except for when it doesn't work. But it's a good, it's a good refresher. So if we take that G7, so the idea that when you have a G7 that wants to go to C major, you play the jazz minor scale up a half step, right? So G7, you play A flat melodic minor, ascending melodic minor, and that's your what many call the Superlocrian scale, right? The seventh mode of melodic minor. And you know, in 2-5-1 licks and things like that, I've talked about this in other videos, and I talk about it in these books. But I remember learning this thing from Hank, where it's basically on a G7. Well, the whole 2-5-1 lick was like on D minor, and then on the G7, the A flat melodic minor scale resolving stepwise to the third of C. And I could have also resolved to the minor third if I wanted it to go to C minor. And I notice on the Playin here, she's also got like an arpeggio down at the bottom that looks like it's kind of like a G7 flat 13, G7 altered chord. It says, you know, the tensions that you get from playing the jazz minor scale, A flat melodic minor over a G7, flat 9, the sharp 9, the flat 5, and the flat 13, all the so-called altered notes. So kind of interesting, you know, and like I said, many of us have learned this as the Superlocrian scale, and we've had our melodic minor harmony been sort of beat into us. At least it was for me as an undergrad here, you know, Dan Hurley's ear training classes and jazz fundamentals. Via his book, The Jazz Language, I really learned my melodic minor harmony. And, you know, the sound of it, y'all, I use it improvising. I use it in writing tunes and analyzing how to play over tunes, especially from like the post-bop kind of, or 1960s Wayne Shorter tunes, Herbie Hancock tunes, things like that. I find it very helpful. And, you know, not to totally jazz school it out, although couldn't be more in a more jazz school environment right now here at jazz school. But, you know, it doesn't, I always like to say, it doesn't always have to be a 7-note scale as the way that you address these kinds of sounds and evoke these kinds of sounds. Like, you know, I often talk about how you could get that sound, or the sort of functional aspects of that sound, also by playing like just a G augmented triad. That gives you a lot of the meat of what that sound is about. Or, you know, oftentimes I'll play that scale, but with chromaticism, you know, so it's not like I'm necessarily playing all 7 notes. Is that A flat melodic minor? I mean, some of it. I mean, the reason I know those notes is because I learned this jazz minor thing. So that's one type of dominant. And then the other thing would be like, say the G7 in Girl from Ipanema, if you're playing Girl from Ipanema in F, which many of us do, you know. The second chord is like a G13, but it doesn't go to C, right? It goes from G13 to G minor. So if you play the jazz minor scale off of the 5th, so D, again, it would be, the jazz minor scale, the melodic minor scale, ascending off of the 5th, it would be a D melodic minor. It's kind of a cool sound. Some of you may know this sound as a Lydian dominant. So again, like, you know, 4th mode melodic minor, right? 4th? Yeah. And it gives you some of those altered tensions. It gives you the sharp 11, but there's a natural 13 and a natural 9. So it's not as dissonant. It doesn't have to like resolve necessarily. I mean, none of them really have to resolve, but the G7 that resolves 5-1 can sort of bear all those other alterations, provided you resolve them. This one can kind of just exist as a sound that doesn't have to be, it's not as imperative that it resolves. It can just kind of like hang out there, and then you just go to G minor without stressing too much, or wherever the chord is going to go. In the case of Girl from Ipanema, it goes to G minor. But again, the idea is that If it goes G7 5 1, melodic minor, jazz minor, up a half step. And if it doesn't do that, so if it does anything else, you can play that sound. You could play the jazz minor scale off the fifth. So it's a really that's how I learned it too. That's how I learned basically how to think about this melodic minor harmony. I didn't get like initially the idea that there's 7 modes of melodic minor and here's each sound that you would use it over in each specific situation. It was more like a way to get at those sort of like magical notes on the dominants that I would hear on jazz records, not necessarily in this context, not like Wes Montgomery knew what a jazz minor scale was or had ever heard of it. I don't know that he did. And I remember Hank Mackie later telling me that he used to teach more out of like the Joe Pass book. I believe it's called the Joe Pass. Oh, I'm going to forget now. It's bad. I talk about it in my dissertation because he has 2 books. There's the Joe Pass guitar style and the Joe Pass guitar method. And one of them, he talks about how, in the context of a 2-5-1, he actually goes through the modes of the major scale. And he talks about like a G7 going to C, how, Mixolydian, you don't get any of those altered flat 9, flat 5. You just get, you do get some color tones, things that Joe Pass calls color tones, like 9, natural 9, 13, things like that. But in that book, he talks about just taking your Mixolydian scale and maybe picking one of those notes to alter. So play Mixolydian, but then flat the 13. Flat the 13 and flat the 9. I can't even think about it that way, but he sort of does it in different combinations. Whereas this melodic minor business, jazz minor business, is like the one-stop shop for your altered dominant. It gives you all those tones. And there's also there's different ways, different sounds. I mean, half whole diminished. I remember while Hank Mackie was showing me this jazz minor business, I remember Clyde Kerr Jr. at NOCA, New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, talking a lot about half whole diminished, showing a G7. This idea that you could play the A flat whole half diminished or G half whole diminished scale, a symmetrical scale, alternating half steps and whole steps, and it gives you some of those tones too, right? It gives you it has 8 notes. It's an octatonic scale, so it gives you the flat 9, sharp 11, and also the natural 13 and the natural 5th. And you hear it a lot in the context of these diminished patterns on a lot of records, Joe Pass would do a lot of those too. It's one of mine. I think I made that up, or maybe I stole it from somewhere. But so there's a lot of other ways to do it, but I always found I thought it sounded cool, the jazz minor, and over the years I would mention that I had learned it that way, and people would look at me sort of like, what are you talking about, jazz minor? And I was like, well, melodic minor. And they'd be like, oh yeah, melodic minor modes. And then sometimes they'd make a face because it's not hip always to talk about melodic minor scales and stuff outside of jazz school or even in jazz school. Although I find, and I've said this before, that like sometimes in my improv class I assume that people already know the melodic minor stuff and that they've kind of like scoff at it perhaps because they've been there, done that, and they're more into like what's the hip thing that Herbie actually plays on this thing, or McCoy Tyner or whatever. But I kind of realized that some people just didn't get it. Like they skipped it in the sense that maybe they not that they didn't understand it, only that they hadn't really had it as a topic of discussion. And so I kind of go through that a little bit I'll do it next week in my improv class. So I think it is important, even if only for historical curiosity. But this is so cool. Maybe y'all can, if you want to find this sheet of paper, you can search around on Facebook. And I think it was Sheryl Bailey. Someone shared it. But really cool stuff. Takes me back down memory lane. But jazz minor, y'all. Ascending melodic minor scale. Play it up a half step on a dominant that's going 5-1. Play it off of the 5th on that dominant. A big 2 dominant on your tunes like Just Friends, But Beautiful has that hang on the 2 dominant for a long time. Girl from Ipanema, Take the A Train, that second chord. Although, on the Duke Ellington recording of take the A train, that arrangement, it's more of a whole tone sound for the dominant that doesn't go 5/1, rather than melodic minor off the fifth. It's more D whole tone in that case, in that key. Although no one really solos. I guess, does Ben Webster get a little solo on that? I can't remember. I should remember that, but I don't know that he plays either one of them. I feel like maybe he plays over the bridge, and it doesn't really come up. Because, in improvisation, of course, I think the sort of predominant sound I don't know, when did it change? When we all went to jazz school? It is, I'll say one other thing. I was, realizing I was going to make this video because it's just fascinating to me. I was texting with Steve Masakowski, who I remember Hank telling me that he started teaching this way because when Steve came back from Berklee to New Orleans, he showed Hank this concept. And so I texted Steve. I was like, where did you and Emily Remler and whoever else get this from? And he couldn't remember whoever. I assumed it's some educator at Berklee at this time who was teaching this, but we don't know. He said he couldn't remember. So somebody was, at least it got to the two of them. So, and it's funny when you're sort of doing history like this. I mean, I've got the document, right? I've got the primary document, and I've got the source, right? The primary source who was there, who I talked to. I wonder if I need IRB approval to talk to him. But then it's like, well, but they don't remember necessarily who was the person that this came from. And you can see how this could spiral off or snowball into a huge rolling boulder of jazz education that will smother us all. But anyway, I just thought it was fascinating, y'all. So, jazz minor, check it out. And I'll be back to my regular dissecting jazz tunes pretty soon, once I get into the semester here. All right, so take care.